Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Battles Americans of War Behind the Battles. Continuing on with our war criming, sons of bitchin', Union and Confederate allies. This time we're bouncing back over the Union side. We're going to take a look at three of the most known things that could be considered Union war crimes or atrocities, whatever you want to call them. Obviously, we've got Sherman's March to the Sea, Sheridan's burning of the Valley, and General Order Number 11, which was in Missouri, that mandated people basically got kicked out of their homes and shit. So we'll take a look at all three, and then we'll see what would make them a war crime by today's standard versus what the rules said back then about what happened. So we're not going to get into battles and all that shit. Obviously, we're just going to mainly be talking about what happened during what they were doing. Right. The story of Sherman's March is one of those moments where the war stopped being a contest between two armies and became something bigger. By the time Sherman looked south from the ruins of Atlanta in the autumn of '64, the fighting had already stretched on for more than 3 years. Sherman's armies had battered through North Georgia, taken the largest city in the state, Atlanta, cut deep into the Confederacy's interior. But Sherman knew that simply winning battles wasn't going to end the war or end anything. The Confederacy, they still had resources, still had railroads, still had farms and mills and supplies that kept the Confederate war machine grinding forward. And he believed very firmly the fastest way to finish the war was to strike not only at the armies, but the very system that fed them.
Yep, should have done that in the very beginning. Well, so Sherman sat down and crafted a new approach. Something Americans had not seen on this scale at all. Instead of chasing General Hood across Tennessee or even sitting in Atlanta, waiting for the old Rebs to recover, he would cut loose from his supply lines, march across Georgia, and carve a straight scar from Atlanta to Savannah. He planned to live off the land, forge aggressively, destroy anything and everything in his path worth military value, crush the psychological backbone of the old rebel resistance. His orders reflected that philosophy with crystal clarity. Special Field Orders Number 120 told his men to take what they needed, destroy railroads, burn supplies that could support the old rebel cause, and even leave enough, just leave barely enough for the civilians to live, but nothing more.
Yeah, did they, though?
Right, I doubt it. It was the official blueprint for what we now call a Scorched Earth campaign. We all know that.
On the morning the march began, about 60,000 Union soldiers pulled out of the Atlanta ruins and stretched themselves into 4 great columns. They didn't look like a normal army on campaign. They looked like a moving ecosystem. Soldiers, freed people following the columns, mule teams, cattle, artillery, endless wagons. They advanced methodically into the heart of Georgia with the city of Savannah as the end goal. And Georgia felt the weight of them almost immediately. Everywhere the blue columns moved, they tore up railroads by heating the iron rails over fires and twisting them into the famous Sherman's neckties. Said, we're not just going to take the rails. You guys ain't using them again.
Right.
They burned down railroad depots, destroyed the telegraph lines, all of them.
Right.
Tore down bridges. Anything that allowed Confederate armies to move or communicate was done. In farming areas, foraging parties went house to house collecting food, livestock, and supplies. Many of the soldiers followed the orders carefully and only took what they needed.
Right.
Obviously, others, known as bummers, they pushed the limits.
Of course they did.
They raided smokehouses and barns, emptied cupboards, sometimes burned homes that resisted or had taken shots at foragers.
Yeah.
The official intent was not to starve civilians, but in many places there was barely anything left after the army moved through and ravaged the land.
I mean, he knew what was going to happen. Of course. The destruction was not random. Sherman targeted the infrastructure that kept the Confederacy alive. Mills that ground grain, factories produced tools and weapons, cotton gins that produced cotton,
Right.
rail hubs that supplied Confederate armies. Places like Griswoldville, Milledgeville, Sandersville, and countless rural communities felt the same impact. Smoke rising, fences gone, barns empty, railroads twisted into useless shapes. There's no such thing as a useless shape. Piles of corn and hay burned. Livestock driven off by the thousands. Entire counties saw their economic base crippled in a matter of days.
It wasn't just property that felt the blow either. Thousands of enslaved people fled plantations as Sherman columns approached. They followed the army in enormous numbers, families carrying whatever they could, walking through mud, sometimes traveling for days to keep up with the rear of the march.
You got to.
Sherman struggled with what to do here now. He's like, I got all these people now.
All right.
He wanted to weaken slavery and hit the plantation economy, but he did not want his column slowed.
All right.
Sometimes Union officers allowed free people to follow. Sometimes they pushed large groups away because the army, we can't feed you guys.
Right.
Heartbreaking scenes unfolded on roads and riverbanks as families begged to stay with the soldiers.
If you can keep
Some
up.
were allowed, and many, they were not.
Right.
Nothing we can do about it, guys. You'll be free soon enough.
Right. Confederate civilians saw the march as something close to the end of the world. Southern newspapers described the Union columns as vandals, invaders deliberately destroying everything in their path. Women wrote in their diaries about the terror of seeing blue-coated soldiers marching up their roads. Barns burned in the distance, livestock driven off, smoke dripped in over the treetops. They described soldiers taking food they needed for winter. They described shotguns taken from walls. They describe horses taken from stalls. In a war already filled with bitterness, Sherman's march deepened that wound. They're pissed.
And to top it off, Confederate military leaders couldn't do anything about it. Confederacy had no army large enough to confront Sherman head-on in Georgia. Cavalry harassed the flanks, though local militia tried to slow the columns. That was like trying to stop the tide.
Right.
Sherman's forces too large, too spread out, and too well organized. Every attempt to block them was pushed aside. Town after town after town reported the same thing. Union soldiers marched in, burned the railroad, took supplies, released enslaved people, and they moved on. Crazy.
Wow. As the march continued, Sherman became more convinced that this kind of warfare was necessary. He believed that by making Georgia howl, as he famously put it, he was bringing the war to a faster and more decisive close. The march was not aimed at killing civilians. His army killed very few. But,
Directly.
Right. But by crushing the ability of Georgia to support the Confederate armies and by breaking morale on the home front, he believed he was saving lives in the long term.
What does it say?
Right.
Kill a few to save many or something, that term?
Right. It is the core argument behind his strategy. The fastest way to finish the fight is to make resistance feel impossible.
That's true.
Wow.
From the Southern's point of view, Sherman's march was remembered as an act of pure devastation. People wrote later that it was the most terrible experience of their lives. Entire plantations were ruined, corn cribs emptied, wells contaminated in some cases. They're probably pissing and shitting. Bridges burned, churches looted by undisciplined foragers, homes stripped of anything useful. Many Southerners compared it to ancient invasions, describing Sherman's men as barbarian horde. The Mongols are coming through just raping and pillaging.
Right.
Children remembered watching soldiers rip open feather beds and scatter the contents in the yard just because they're assholes. Women remembered hiding family heirlooms in wells, graves, and woods in desperate attempts to save something from the storm.
Jeez, oh, Pete. Wow.
They're also hiding their vaginas.
Oh, when the columns reached Savannah in December of 1864, Sherman captured that very city without any blood. He famously sent President Lincoln a telegram offering the city as a Christmas gift. Savannah had been spared the destruction that Atlanta had experienced, but the countryside behind Sherman looked like a blackened corridor stretching back nearly 300 miles. It was one of the most significant military operations in American history. Well, this is because it shattered the idea that civilians and property away from the front lines were safe. Guess what? It's not. Sherman proved that the North could walk wherever it wanted and destroy whatever it needed. Wow. Well, after Savannah, Sherman turned north into South Carolina.
Yeah, they got it bad.
And the destruction grew even more severe. Many Union soldiers blamed South Carolina personally for starting the war.
They were the first to secede.
Barns burned, towns burned, rail lines burned. The path through South Carolina was even harsher than Georgia, and the memories lasted generations. Ooh.
By the time the war ended, Sherman's march had become a symbol. To the Union, it was a decisive blow that helped break the Confederacy's ability to keep fighting. To the South, it was remembered as a campaign of ruin, something that touched civilians who had never even fired a shot, something that turned quiet farms and small towns into scenes of ashes and twisted iron. Shaped Southern memory for more than a century. Well, clearly. You can still read those diaries and letters today and feel the shock and heartbreak on every page. And When you put all the sources together, you see the full picture. Why Sherman did it. How the Union saw it was necessary striking an enemy that still had resources. How the Confederacy felt as a direct attack on their homes and lives. And how the destruction was not random, but a carefully planned strategy to break the backbone of the Confederate war effort by cutting deep into the land that fed it. That's probably not even telling, like, the most graphic details of what went down.
No, not at all. Let's take a look at Burning of the Valley. Late summer of 1864, the Shenandoah Valley had become something more than a scenic stretch of farmland. It was a lifeline of the Confederacy.
For that, yeah, it was the back door. What do they call it? The breadbasket?
The rich soil of the valley produced wheat, corn, oats, hay, livestock, and supplies that fed the old Reb soldiers from Virginia to Richmond. Whenever Lee needed grain, the valley sent it. Whenever the rebels' cavalry needed fodder, the valley provided. Whenever the South wanted to rattle the North by threatening Pennsylvania or Washington, the valley acted as the perfect corridor.
Yeah, the whole highway.
Everyone in the Union High Command understood this, and they understood that as long as Shenandoah Valley remained productive, the Confederacy would always have one more breath.
Yep. That's when Philip Sheridan rode into command of the Army of the Shenandoah. He was given a mission that went beyond defeating an enemy army. His job was to break the valley itself. Break the will of the people, too. Grant wanted the valley stripped clean so it could no longer feed the Confederate troops or support raids in the North. Sheridan believed the same thing. He said, hell yeah. He wrote the quickest way to finish that war was to destroy the crops, destroy the mills, drive off the livestock, and leave the valley unable to sustain a single soldier in gray, or anybody for that matter.
Yeah, gotta get the fuck out. And the campaign began with traditional battles. Sheridan beat Juba early at Winchester and at Fisher's Hill, ripping away what rebel strength remained in that region. But once Early was pushed aside, the nature of the war, it all changed. Sheridan looked across the valley and saw barns filled with grain, mills full of flour, herds of cattle and sheep grazing on grass, and farms ready for harvest. He said, oh, hell no.
That ain't happening.
Yeah, I can just picture the Grinch looking down at it. To Sheridan, it meant that the old Confederate war effort could keep limping forward. To end the conflict quickly, he decided the valley must go. Well, that was the beginning of what people who lived there would remember as the burning.
For nearly 2 weeks in late September and early October, Union soldiers fanned out across a 70-mile stretch from Staunton to Strasburg, and in places 30 miles across, either of them. Everywhere they marched, the same scenes unfolded. Barns erupted in flames until whole valleys glowed at night like a string of enormous lanterns. Mills that had ground grain for generations smashed, burned, or leveled. Haystacks burned in rows, fences turned to ash, orchards cut down, stock pens emptied. One observer climbed a ridge near Mount Jackson and counted more than 100 barns burning at the same time. Jeez, dude.
Wow. Well, those numbers tell the story. Nearly 1,400 barns gone. 70 mills burned to the ground. Hundreds of thousands of bushels of grain useless. More than 10,000 cattle gone. Thousands of sheep murdered or marched away. Entire communities stripped down to bare earth in a matter of days. Well, some farms tried to hide what they had. Families buried food in fields or hid livestock in the woods. Others drove their animals into mountain hollows. But Union foragers moved with speed and determination. When they found hidden stock, they took it. When they found stores of grain, they burned them. Occasionally, a farmer fought back. One man, he stood on a haystack firing a shotgun at Union soldiers until he was shot down. His barn burned. Several families fled their farms as well, with only a few belongings stuffed into pillowcases. Walking toward Harrisonburg with children in tow, while columns of blue uniforms passed them on the road. Oh, you fucking whores.
The soldiers themselves understood what they were doing, obviously. Many followed orders and obeyed the instructions to spare private homes, unless the owners had fired on them.
Right.
Others took their orders further, and the chaos of fire, smoke, and scattered livestock created scenes that looked like the end of the world. One soldier wrote that the night sky glowed red from horizon to horizon. Another recalled that the air itself felt hot from the heat of so many burning barns. Sheridan, he believed it was necessary. He once said that he felt more mercy in destroying crops than in killing young men on the battlefield. That's probably true. He's like, damn, such a shame.
Right.
He saw his mission as saving lives by taking away the Confederacy's ability to keep fighting, hence taking away lives.
Well, Southern civilians saw none of that logic. They're like, what? To them, they're like, just kill the boys. Shit. To them, this was devastation on a level that they've never imagined. Women stood on porches watching barns that their families had built burst into fire. Children cried as their livestock was driven down the road. Elderly men pleaded with officers to spare a season's worth of work and were turned away. Many wrote in diaries that the valley had become a blackened wasteland. Others, well, they said it felt like as if someone had torn their lives out of the earth. People compared to an ancient invasions
Again, right?
and call it barbarity.
Wow.
The burned district became a phrase whispered for generations afterward.
The destruction grew even worse after the death of Lieutenant John Rogers Meigs, who was shot near Dayton on October 3rd.
What do you expect to happen?
Sheridan believed that Confederate bushwhackers had ambushed him. In retaliation, he ordered homes and barns around the area completely burned. 30 houses went up in flames, along with the mills and farm buildings in the surrounding country. For the families who lived there, it felt like punishment delivered without mercy.
Right.
Through all of it, Sheridan pressed on. He wanted to make the valley untenable for any Confederate force. By the time his men finished, that's exactly what it become. When Early tried to return later in the fall, he found the valley stripped bare. He's like, damn. There was no grain for his horses, no hay, no livestock to feed his soldiers, nothing. Sheridan then crushed him again at Cedar Creek, October 19th, ending all hopes of the Confederate reclaiming the region.
Wow. The so-called burning left behind a psychological scar that ran even deeper than physical destruction. Union newspapers celebrated its success, declared that Sheridan had completed the task. But the South, well, it was a memory that stayed sharp long after muskets went silent. They remembered smoke rolling across the valley floor, trembling of the ground as herds of captured cattle were driven away. Children clung to them, while soldiers tossed hay bales into flames. For the valley, it was more than a military campaign. It was a moment that changed the world forever. Sheridan believed that he had done what he needed to do. He said that by breaking the valley's ability to support rebellion, he shortened the war. Many historians later agreed that the campaign struck a blow that the old Rebs never recovered from. But generations of valley families remembered it differently. They inherited stories of barns that had stood since the Revolution, burned to ashes in minutes. They spoke of orchards cut down, mills that had fed entire counties reduced to blackened stones, and a landscape so altered that it no longer felt like home. You bastards. That is the truth of Sheridan's burning of the Shenandoah Valley.
That is the truth, burning bridge.
A campaign where war reached not only armies, but the farms and the families that fed them. A moment when fire became a weapon, and the valley itself became a battlefield. And long after the smoke cleared, the memory still remains.
And the memory remains.
And it carried forward by those who lived through it, and by the land that still bears the mark of those terrible weeks in 1864. Fucking Sheridan.
And that's going to lead us to General Order number 11.
Martial law.
Late summer of 1863, the western border of Missouri was already at a place on the edge of collapse. For 2 years, that region had been trapped in one of the most vicious guerrilla wars. We'll get to those guys for the Confederate side.
Yeah.
In American history, it was a land of ambushes, raids, executions, and violence that seemed to visit every farm and cabin from Kansas City all the way down to the Arkansas line. Union troops guarded towns and patrols rode the roads. But the moment the sun dipped behind the hills, Confederate bushwhackers slipped out of the woods and struck with terrifying speed.
Oh, wow.
Entire communities lived with a kind of fear that never slept. Are we going to be next?
Right. Wow. The worst fit, August 21st, William Quantrill led more than 400 guerrillas across the line into Kansas. They rode into Lawrence at sunrise and carried out one of the bloodiest civilian massacres of the entire war. More than 150 men and boys shot down in the streets or pulled from homes and executed. Houses burned, business looted, town left smoldering. When news of Lawrence massacre reached Union commanders, shock gave way to anger. And the man caught at the center of it was Brigadier General Thomas Ewing, who commanded the district. He had been fighting the guerrillas for months. He was chasing shadows. He was trying to hold some kind of order. Now the people of Kansas demanded vengeance. Like, fuck you.
They just killed 200 men and little boys. You wouldn't believe the only way to stop the guerrillas was to cut them off from civilian support that kept them alive. Hey, it's a common theme here, huh?
Yep.
Many of the bushwhackers came from families scattered across Jackson, Cass, Bates, and Vernon counties in Missouri. They relied on food, shelter, horses, and information from sympathetic households. Ewan, he had issued earlier orders trying to control this network, but the Lauren massacre convinced him those half measures were not going to be good enough. We need full measures. 4 days later, he signed General Order Number 11.
Wow, that order, it declared that every civilian living in those 4 Missouri counties had to leave unless they lived within 1 mile of certain Union-controlled towns or military posts.
Damn.
Anyone who could prove strong Union loyalty could stay close to those safe zones. Everyone else, regardless of age, gender, or condition, guess what? You gotta go. The Army would destroy anything left behind that could help the guerrillas. It was one of the most sweeping forced removal orders ever issued on American soil.
Until.
Right. When the order went into effect, the scene across western Missouri was chaotic and heartbreaking. Families packed wagons with whatever possessions they could grab. Some carried nothing more than a sack of flour and a blanket. Old men hobbled down roads as they traveled their whole lives, unsure of where they were heading. Women led children through fields as smoke drifted up from the burning homes. The roads filled with miles of refugees walking away from places where their families had lived for generations.
Damn. Behind them, the Army moved in with grim determination. Again, barns burned, smokehouses emptied, fences torn down, haystacks and granaries set on fire. Anything that could offer shelter or food to bushwhackers was gone. Entire townships were left stripped and silent. In some places, the soldiers set fire to everything standing. In others, they allowed buildings to remain only to see wandering deserters and thieves burn them later anyways.
Oh, wow.
The countryside slowly transformed into what people later called the Burnt District, a barren and scorched landscape stretching across miles of once settled and robust farm country. It's crazy, dude.
Wow. The anger among civilians, deep and personal. Many of the people forced out under the order had never helped a guerrilla in their lives. They felt punished for crimes they did not commit. Women wrote later that the march away from their homes broke their hearts.
Broke my heart.
Children remembered watching flames rise from barns built by their grandparents. Some walked away with livestock herded in front of them. Others left everything. There were Union loyalists who had sacrificed family members to the fighting who still found themselves uprooted.
Hey, man, everybody means everybody.
Even soldiers escorting civilians sometimes admitted they hated what the order was requiring them to do.
But to Ewan and the Kansas settlers who had watched Lawrence burn, this was the bitter medicine they believed the valley needed. Their view was simple. The bushwhackers could no longer hide in the folds of Missouri's hills or slip into friendly homes for meals and supplies, and guess what? Their strength would collapse. Cut off the roots and the tree dies, they say. The question of whether the medicine was worse than the disease would be left to history.
All right.
Politically, the order exploded like a shell in the lap of local leadership. Unionist Missourians saw it as punitive and uncontrolled. Anti-guerrilla Kansans thought it too lenient. Charles Jennison and his Kansas troop carried out the order with a heavy hand, leaving burned farm structures in their wake.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Governor Hamilton Gamble of Missouri tried to calm the outrage, but the rift between Missourians and Kansans widened beyond repair. Are they still like enemies?
Right.
The order deepened regional bitterness that would last long after Appomattox.
In the months after the order, the burnt district settled into a haunting quietness. Charred chimneys stood where cabins did. Blackened fields stretched in every direction. Roads that once led to thriving farmsteads now ran past empty foundations. People were gone. Land was empty. And for a time, Ewing's strategy worked. With no support network, the guerrillas were weakened, and they scattered. But the civilian suffering was immense, and the memory of those days burned as fiercely as the fires themselves. Fucking pissed.
When the war ended, the refugees of the burnt district returned to the lands that barely resembled what they left. Some found nothing but stones and a few twisted iron hinges marking where their homes had once been. It's like coming back to like a F5 tornado or something.
Right.
Others rebuilt slowly, painfully, scraping together, scraping together whatever shingles and boards from the ruins they could find. The scars remained in the stories families told their children for generations. Memories of walking away from a homestead in dust and heat. Memories of cattle driven off by soldiers. Memories of looking back and seeing a place that had once been full of life standing empty and silent.
Wow. Order number 11 became one of the most controversial acts of the entire war. Some defended it as a necessary response to a guerrilla uprising that played by no rules. Others condemned it as a collective punishment and an act of devastation beyond acceptable wartime behavior. Whatever judgment history makes, the truth is, it changed Missouri forever. It turned 4 counties into a wasteland. Thousands of civilians on the road. Stands as one of the most starkest examples of how the Civil War reached beyond soldiers and struck directly at the homes and lives of just ordinary people. And that is the story of General Order number 11 and the Burnt District. A campaign not fought with lines of infantry or volleys of musket fire, but with fire, empty roads, and forced removal of families caught in the crossfire of 2 enemies fighting each other. A moment when the border bared its teeth and the cost of civil conflict fell hardest on the people who could least afford it.
Yeah, that's a common theme here, I guess. Now, let's see what, in terms of actual laws and today, how that would be treated. Is it a war crime, or is it simply what needed to be done? When people look back at the war, they usually see blue and gray lines firing across open fields. What they don't always see is the other battlefield, which is the ones we already talked about. When the war slipped into that sphere, commanders found themselves turned into something that barely existed before. A written law of war. A document that tried to tell generals what they could destroy, what they could seize, and what they most definitely could not do.
Right.
All of it wrapped around one question. When does the rough business of war become something that even wartime law calls a crime?
No one knows. It's a fine line.
Yeah, the Union Army entered the later wars of the year guided by a document unlike anything the world had seen. That was called the Lieber Code, which was a set of rules drafted by a German-American scholar named Francis Lieber. Lincoln approved it in the spring of 1863, issuing it as General Orders Number 100. It became the first modern legal code designed to govern the conduct of armies in the field. European nations studied it, borrowed from it, and eventually folded its principles into the Hague and Geneva laws that we still use today.
Nice.
But back then, it was brand new, and the battlefield commanders of the Union Army carried it in their pockets. Like, what do we do here?
Right. Well, the code explained what the Army could do under something it called military necessity. If a target helped the enemy fight, then the Union Army could strike that target.
Fair game.
Railroads, bridges, grain, livestock, mills, depots, factories, telegraph lines, anything that helped an opposing army.
Yeah, but where do you draw the line of,
Right.
by your opinion, this could help them?
Right. But the code also drew a hard line in the dirt. It said that the military necessity did not allow wanton devastation, cruelty for its own sake, or destruction carried out simply to punish an enemy population. It forbade violence against civilians. It ordered officers to respect private property unless its seizure was truly needed for the war effort. And it warned that any officer who committed wanton destruction could be court-martialed or even executed.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the world the commanders lived in, a world where destruction was allowed and often expected, but only if they could look the law in the eye and say these were necessary for the conduct of the war.
Right.
If not, they slipped into what the code itself called offenses against the laws of war. The term war crime didn't exist yet, but the idea did.
Right.
Even then, the line between necessity and illegality was thin. The code tried to keep commanders honest, but the war has a way of bending rules until they snap. What are you going to do? Some officers believed they were following the law because everything they destroyed could, in theory, help the enemy, right? Others believed the code gave them permission to carry out harsh acts as long as they whispered the words military necessity while they did it. Right. Military necessity.
Right.
And civilians caught in the middle rarely cared what officers called it. They just know their shit was getting burned and knocked down and homes were emptied. And they believed the army was violating the land, was also violating the law.
Damn right. Wow. After the war, the world kept building on the foundation that the Lieber Code laid down. The Hague laws in the early 20th century repeated the rule that property cannot be destroyed unless it is helping out the enemy. The Geneva Conventions expanded protections for civilians caught in conflict. In our century, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court It went further and declared that extensive destruction of property without military necessity is a war crime, and so is the forced transfer or displacement of civilian populations. Oh, okay. If you take those modern laws and hold them up to the light of the Civil War, you can see exactly where that line runs. Some of the destruction carried out in the later years of the war fits to the definition of lawful military necessity. Armies were destroying railroads used to transport enemy troops. They're striking mills used to feed the enemies. They were seizing livestock used to feed the enemies. Under modern law, those hit the standard of legitimate military targets. But
other actions sit on the edge of the line or lean straight across it. Not lean, they ran across them. Large-scale burning of farms that could not reasonably support an enemy army. There's just a family of 5 with 6 cattle or something.
right.
Destruction of property in areas where there were no Confederate troops at all. Punitive retaliation against civilians after partisan attacks. What are you going to do? They're destroying their farms.
Right.
Forced displacement of entire populations because some members of the community supported guerrillas.
Right.
Under the laws of today, those acts raise questions. Questions about whether the destruction was truly demanded by military necessity or whether it amounted to collective punishment of civilians. Modern tribunals, they would not take an officer's word for it. They would demand proof that each act had a direct military purpose. And without that proof, the law would call it wanton devastation or unlawful destruction of civilian property, which would be a war crime, fellas.
Yes, it would. Yet, it is important to remember that none of these modern laws existed in the 1860s.
They sure didn't.
Commanders lived under the Lieber Code and nothing else. To the Union government at the time, destruction that supported a military aim was not only legal but encouraged if it shortened the war and reduced casualties among soldiers. Civilians might have hated it, but the Union was fighting a rebellion and believed harsh measures were justified if they only helped bring the country back together. So, when modern writers debate whether Civil War commanders committed war crimes, they're really asking 2 questions. First, did anything they did break laws that existed in their own day? And second, if they were judged by today's standards, how would the verdict look?
Well, the answer to the first question is complicated. The Lieber Code allowed wide room for destruction, and the Union Army rarely punished its commanders for exceeding the boundaries anyways. The answer to the second question is clearer. Under modern international law, there are actions from that era that would require a courtroom to sort out, and most likely a guilty verdict.
Right.
Destroying entire civilian districts without clear military necessity, removing populations because of suspected political allegiance, burning property that had no direct impact on enemy supply or movement. These are lines modern law draws firmly. What this reveals is that the Civil War sat at the hinge of history. It began in an old world of loose rules and finished in a new world where the nations demanded laws to restrain armies. They're like, we got to do something about these guys doing shit.
Hold on.
The destruction that shocked civilians then inspired legal reforms that shape how wars are judged now. The flames of the 1860s helped write the rules that govern 21st century conflict. Did it, though, because they were doing the same thing in World War I, II, Vietnam, all the same shit.
Right. And that, my friends, is the stone cold truth behind the question of war crimes in the Civil War. It's not a simple yes or no. It is a story of a country learning in real time what war does to civilians. It's a story of commanders trying to balance necessity with humanity. It's also a story of the first attempt to put the rules of war on paper. And it is a reminder that the lines drawn in smoke and fire across the American landscape are the lines that the modern world still struggles to understand.
Israel.
Right.
Don't cancel us. We're not suicidal, I promise you.
Russia.
All right. Yeah, that's some. So all 3 of those same things: burn, 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 baby, burn.
Yep.
And obviously, I would assume 60% of it was war crime stuff.
Probably.
Obviously, burning mills and
Right.
that stuff. Yeah, but when you start punishing the civilians and stuff like that, then it gets a little dicey. But hey, like I said, both sides have done it.
Yep.
And they continue to do it, as we'll take a look at next week. We'll probably wrap up the war crimes section with more Confederate stuff. We'll obviously go through the guerrilla warfares, and the Confederates were still killing and doing all sorts of stuff to civilians,
They were.
especially black ones, soldiers as well that were injured in camps, just going there. The Saltville Massacre we'll take a look at, where wounded soldiers were in camps, and over 24 or 48 hours, Confederate soldiers kept coming back to the medical tents and just shooting people in the faces and shit, just to do it. So
ridiculous.
we got that coming up next week, and then we'll continue our regularly scheduled programming of profiling some probably despicable human beings. I'm sure we'll get to and some good ones. So see that, subscribe, like, comment, share this with your friends, and if you guys are listening still, make sure you guys, if you're not subscribing to our YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube, because we're going to be doing YouTube specific like shorts, or even like maybe 5, 6, 7 minute videos of stories across our Outlaws and Gunslingers and Battles of the American Civil War, where obviously are not long enough for an episode. So that'll be exclusive on YouTube for that kind of stuff. So we'll still have some stuff that is notable, but like I said, can't be a whole story. So make sure you subscribe, Bang Dang Network on YouTube, and we'll see you next week for some more atrocities, war crimes, and all of the likes over here on Battles of the American Civil War, Behind the Battles, where the month of Michigan is weak.
Bang Dang.